are on the edge of a dark precipice where the rule of law doesn't exist, at least at the federal level. I mean, we're talking about psychopaths here. We're talking about sociopaths here. We're talking about people with no morals, no conscience, no nothing. Why are they going to obey a court order? And that, to me, is the scariest aspect of all this.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to George Conway Explains It All. To Sarah, I'm Sarah Longwell, publisher of The Bulwark. And because I'm not a lawyer, I've asked my good friend George Conway from the Society for the Rule of Law to explain the illegal news to me, because that's all we got, George. We got illegal news.
No, it is just a festivus of illegality that we have here in the United States of America. And, I don't think I can explain it all. I think I'm going to be completely stumped because I don't think you can possibly catch up to all the things that are happening as they happen.
Which is by design, right? I mean, this is, is how it's supposed to go. We're supposed to overwhelm us with this stuff.
I think that's right. I always hesitate when anybody ever associates the name Donald Trump with the word strategy. I don't think he's strategic in thinking. I do think that the people around him, to some extent, I don't think they're the brightest people in the world, all of them, do have a strategy of just overwhelming everybody. And they have an advantage. Not that they're smart, it's that they're evil. And they have an advantage in that normally, if you or I took over the government and wanted to turn it around in some fashion suitable to our beliefs and desires, we'd be sitting around figuring out, okay, carefully what the plan is, what are the side effects of the plan, what harm could it do, would our plan work, and we'd be consulting with lawyers to figure out whether the plan is legal and what authorizations does it require, which parts of the United States code impact it, and that's a process, and it takes a while. They don't believe in any of that. They don't care about the side effects of anything they're doing. They're not doing it necessarily because they have hard and fast beliefs on what a good world should be, a better world should be. They're doing it out of desires for revenge and just outright nihilism. And they certainly do not care about legality. And that's the advantage they have. That's the reason why they can proceed so quickly. And then the other aspect of it is, and again, this isn't, even Trump can understand that. It's not strategy as such. It's bullies act in an unrestrained fashion to intimidate. Okay. And that's what the instinctual source of all of this is with Trump. You intimidate. And the way you intimidate is by you just come at everybody all at once. And it's that basically what we have in America today is I've heard all sorts of phrases to describe Trumpism as fascistic or wannabe fascist or authoritarian or autocratic. One word that I've heard in the past is pathocracy is what we have been headed for, what we had during the first Trump administration, which I have now taken to call shit show one. I think it's even more specific than pathocracy, which is a word that somebody, I don't know who coined it.
What is this word? Pathocracy?
Pathocracy. In other words, it's pathological. It's a pathological form of government. I mean, there's lots of other words. You could have kakistocracy for the government by the worst.
Is that a real word, or did you just invent that word?
No, I did not invent pathocracy. I'm about to tell you the word that I did invent. I think I invented it because I see no trace of it ever in any dictionary or writing, and I probably should save it because I want to write something. But for the Bulwark viewers, since they pay so much money, do they pay money?
No, this is free.
This is free. You're giving me out for free?
I mean, no advertisers are on it. They got to watch ads.
Okay. Psychopathocracy.
Yeah, rolls off the tongue. I can see how this could be.
Basically,
really
what
catch
it
fire.
is if you take all the characteristics that I was talking about last year, about psychopaths, malignant narcissists, narcissistic sociopaths, whatever phrase you want to use to describe them, because all of those phrases are like overlapping circles in a Venn diagram. You have a government that is psychopathic because it is being run by psychopaths for psychopathic ends. And psychopaths seek destruction. This is what they are seeking. And, that's where we are today. And it's a really, really, I don't think people are starting to catch on to it a few days late, a few years late. But that's where we are.
Okay.
That's cheerful?
It's cheerful. Yeah. I do want to I have been trying in this way that just sort of overwhelms the senses. Like, part of what's difficult is that you're trying to pull apart, like, you're right. If both of us, who I think would have ambitions, if you gave us magic wands, we were running the government, we would have ambitions around potentially.
Bright ideas. Not all of them would work, but yeah.
Yeah, to how you constrain the government, how you limit the government, perhaps how you shrink the government a little bit.
Yeah.
But you would also recognize that you had to do it in ways that were careful, ways that would likely have blowback. And so, like, rather than stressing themselves with learning about any of the functions of these things, who might be harmed, what do they actually do, what is essential, what is non-essential, or what is less essential, and making those careful judgments, he's got the Twitter playbook, and he's just like, we're just going to fire everybody. We're just telling everybody to stop showing up for work. Now, it took a while and it was funny, not funny, like, haha, but like, he did it over the weekend too, and he tweeted about this, right? I got to tell you, yesterday he tweeted 200 times. I don't know, does ketamine, what does it do that allows you to tweet 200 times while you're dismantling the government? Because it's like a lot to do. But they went in over the weekend and started just like shutting down systems, demanding sort of the keys to all of the confidential things. In the meantime, they managed to make a bunch of Chinese CIA types, like, expose them, just like out them. Now, like, there is collateral damage that's happening from this beyond just what they're doing at these governments. But I was like, this is illegal. Congress has appropriated money for these people. We talked about this last week. It is approved by Congress. You can't just stop it all. So it is illegal, it seems like, on its face. But I was like, why isn't anything happening? But subsequently, there's been a flurry of litigation pushing back against everything going on, from birthright citizenship to the establishment of Doge, to disclosure of personal and financial information to Doge. So is there any of the litigation that you're particularly hopeful about? Like, is this going to work? Are they going to be able to slow these guys down?
Well, you've asked the correct question.
Great news.
In an ordinary world, yes. Because they're going to get, they're going to win some, the plaintiffs, they're going to lose some. Some claims are not yet fully developed because they need discovery. But by and large, these complaints do point out a slew of illegalities. I mean, there are literally dozens of them by now, and it's hard to keep track of them all. But here's the problem, and this is why I've been very pessimistic over the last few days, at least pessimistic in the short and medium, anything but the long term. Maybe in the long term, there'll be some positive out of all of this when it's all over. Trump's going to lose some of these cases, no question. They may even get TRO'd in the FBI agent's case today.
What does TRO'd mean?
Means there's a
temporary restraining order?
You're right, temporary restraining order. What happens when you file a lawsuit that ultimately seeks relief to stop somebody from doing something, like, your neighbor wants to build a big, something or other, it's going to pollute onto your land. You want to stop the government from doing something. You seek a permanent injunction, and you have to go through a trial to get that. But to prevent the harm before you get all the way to a trial, you get temporary relief. And one thing you can do is you can walk into a court and say, here's an affidavit, look at the things that are going on, and please give us a temporary restraining order so that there'll be something left for you to decide, Judge, tomorrow. And then you can have a quick hearing and have a preliminary injunction, and then you go on to the full trial. It's just a whole process of trying to protect the status quo so that ultimately final relief can be granted, and then you'll take an appeal and so on. So today there may be a TRO granted there are at least 3 cases in the U.S. District Court downtown here in D.C. that are attacking the requests, basically the inquiries being made of FBI agents about whether they had anything to do with January 6th prosecutions and so on. And the principal claim, as I understand it, and I've only skimmed these complaints, they were literally just filed within the last 48 hours, is that there are about to be violations or have been violations of the Privacy Act. And the Privacy Act is an act that protects your and my and government employees' confidential information. In other words, if an agency has data about Sarah Longwell, it is prohibited from taking that personal data, personal information, and publishing it on the internet. Also prohibited is the sending of such information from one agency to another absent your consent. And so what the FBI agents' claims is that the government is contemplating or engaging in massive violations of the Privacy Act because they want to compile a list of FBI agents who participated in some fashion in the January 6th prosecutions and investigations, and they want to purge them. And so, it wouldn't be surprising to see that go over to the White House or whatever. And that's what's the allegation. The problem with the allegation is, although it's probably true, the defendants, the government is saying, well, you don't really have any proof that's what's going on. And which is true because it's just news. There's a lot of speculation about what are they doing with this stuff. It hasn't happened yet. And so sometimes, one defense, it's not a crazy defense, is this is all speculative. On the other hand, on a TRO basis, you don't have to prove your case. You just have to show, look, there's something really bad going on here, Judge. But we don't know, we may not have it all figured out yet, but you can see the outlines in the night here. But anyway, to go to the main topic that I'd like to discuss is, okay, what happens when Trump loses some of these cases? And he will lose some of these cases.
This is on my list to talk about.
This is the most important thing because basically we could be just days away from the complete abandonment of federal rule of law in this country. And let me explain this. And I know this sounds very alarmist, but we should be alarmed. This guy doesn't care about laws. Psychopath, the principal psychopath, the elected psychopath doesn't care about laws and obeying rules. And then his minion, who is really exercising more power than he is, the guy running around the government, hooking up to computer sites, he doesn't care about rules either.
Yeah.
What happens when somebody gets enjoined by a federal judge? Judge issues an order saying, thou shalt not do X. Okay, so somebody gets enjoined and they go and they say, fuck you, I'm going to do X anyway. Well, what the judge does next would be to basically have U.S. Marshals go out and arrest person Y who's doing X in violation of a court order and bring them in and hold them in contempt of court. Problem is, all the mechanisms by which federal judges can do that go through the executive branch. The United States Marshal Service, which goes out and executes warrants and would be the person who would be the people who would take somebody into contempt, is part of the United States Department of Justice. And that United States Department of Justice reports to President Donald J. Trump. And so what happens when Trump decides, we're not obeying that order, and he tells Pam Bondi to tell the U.S. Marshal Service to stand down? What good is a federal court order? And once you get to that point, there is no law. And, why are we paying? And it means, why should anyone obey the law at this point, the federal law?
Right.
Why should you and I pay taxes? The government's not going to comply by the law. Is the government going to come after us for not paying taxes? Who's going to do that? They probably took Elon's bias. I mean, we are on the edge of a dark precipice where the rule of law doesn't exist, at least at the federal level. And that, I don't think people fully understand that yet, but I've been gaming this out in my head. And what makes anyone believe that a court order is going to be enforceable now? I don't know. I don't see why we're talking about psychopaths here. We're talking about sociopaths here. We're talking about people with no morals, no conscience, no nothing. Why are they going to obey a court order? And that, to me, is the scariest aspect of all this. All right, so there's all sorts of terrible things that can happen. The federal government cannot, these specific line items that were appropriated may not get spent. That's illegal, absolutely. That's nothing compared to what happens if courts cannot enforce their orders. And if I don't think we're that far away from this.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because this is the rub of what I want to talk about, although it was sort of a different example. So I was on Nicole yesterday, John Heilman was on, and it was like he'd had JVL on his podcast, and JVL sort of laid out this doomsday scenario, but we were talking about birthright citizenship. And I, naively, was like, well, here's the thing. Here's what it says. Like, here's the express language of the Constitution. Couldn't be clearer. Like, I was like, this isn't a public opinion question. It's not even barely a legal question. It's a constitutional question. The Constitution is like just completely straightforward. I read it out loud on live TV to be like, this is what it says. And John Heilman said, okay, Sarah, well, here's the thing. I've had JVL on my podcast, and I was like, oh no, here we go. Darkest timeline. And he's like, but what happens if the Supreme Court, because it'll go up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upholds it because the letter, obviously there's two Supreme Court justices that might not do it anyway because they're Clarence Thomas and Justice Alito. But Amy Coney Barrett does and Kavanaugh does because it's just about having reading comprehension, which I still think most of the people in the Supreme Court have.
Yep.
And then Trump says, well, I don't care. We're going to stop issuing birth certificates. Because here's the thing. Once he does it in one area, you do it in all the areas.
Correct.
Right?
That's
but what happens?
Essentially the point that I was just making.
No, I know it is. But I guess it's if he just defies the Supreme Court, I could see them trying to overrun lower level courts or I don't know, acting until it got. But if he just says dares the Supreme Court to stop him, what happens next?
Yeah, look, I don't think there's a difference between. Actually, I don't think there's a practical difference between defying the Supreme Court and defying the lower courts. And here's why. Because at the end of the day, if the Supreme Court rules against the government in a birthright citizenship case, as you posit, and I think they will, I think the Supreme Court's never going to uphold the crazy theory that the government is pushing. The case gets sent back to the district court. The district court is the court that is charged with enforcing what the law is. Okay, they're at the front lines.
And how do they enforce it? Just give it granularly.
They get I described the process. Basically, let's say the government stops issuing birth certificates to people who are entitled to birth certificates on the kooky theory. Supreme Court says, kooky theory, we're affirming the district court decision, which probably will have already been defied by the government. And so it goes back to the district court. District court says, you must issue these birth certificates. And the head of INS says, no. And what would normally happen would be that person would be held in contempt. And that person could be fined, and that person could be hauled off by the U.S. Marshals and held in civil contempt until he complies. And usually it doesn't get to that because nobody wants to be held in civil contempt until they comply. And the person underneath them doesn't want that too, so they will obey. They'll obey the court order, even if the president of the United States, that's what normally would happen. But as I said, who's going to take these people off to jail to be held in civil contempt?
And you're saying that the marshals themselves,
the U.S. Marshal Service enforces. If I violate a federal court order and I'm held in contempt, because contempt is the way, civil contempt is the way you enforce. You violate an order, the judge, and then you refuse to obey the order. The judge says you need to obey the order, and you defy them. You get held in civil contempt. The judge can fine you, or the judge can, basically keep fining you until you comply, or the judge can basically send the U.S. Marshal Service out at you. That's what.
Right. Okay. So you're a marshal. This marshal's name is Joe,
right.
and Joe Joe Marshall is like, all right, well, the court told me to go do this. That's what I normally do. Who stops Joe? Does Trump call Joe and say,
no,
Joe, don't do this? Or
Joe will have gotten a memo from his superiors saying, you shall not do this, or you will be fired.
And does the court then go to the superior and give them a similar?
None of these people report to the court. That's the point. This marshal reports to some supervisor who ultimately reports to the head of the U.S. Marshal Service, who reports to Pam, to the probably associate or deputy attorney general, I don't know. And then who then reports to Pam Bondi, who then reports to POTUS. Okay? If Trump, I'm not saying any of this is legal, because none of this is legal, but Trump can basically take out the mechanisms by which court orders can be enforced. And he'll enjoy that. You know what he thinks of the courts. He has nothing but contempt for courts. I don't mean that in the legal sense, but he has nothing but contempt. This will, the courts have done bad things to him. Okay? So here's why I think, here's where I think we are, or we possibly could end up. Courts will not be able to enforce their orders against Trump because Trump will disobey them and will basically wipe out the mechanism by which, I hope this isn't true, but I don't, just doing the math and extrapolating and conducting the experiment in my head with these sociopaths who really don't have any limiting, they're not limited by law or conscience or anything. This is where this is happening. So he will not obey court orders, so the law cannot be enforced. And at the same time, he's going to try to enforce his will upon people legally or illegally by, firing them or by prosecuting them or by rounding them up or by calling out the National Guard or the military or whatever. He's going to issue orders. And I think those orders may well be disobeyed too, because I do think government employees and soldiers and people at some point are going to say, I can't, these are illegal orders. I'm not going to obey them. Okay. We're going to see some of that. And he will not have a way to enforce his orders. Not completely. So what I'm saying is we're going to have chaos. There are going to be no rules. There are going to be no laws, at least at the federal level. And that's what I think is terrifying. I hope it doesn't happen, but I just, it's sort of like, how I have scientist friends who will just cringe at this, but it's sort of how they figured out how the Big Bang occurred. They just sort of logically traced the principles and the things that are affecting the system back to the very beginning. Well, this is tracing the actors and their behavioral modes into the future. I don't see them obeying the law. I don't see a future for the rule of law right now in under the federal Constitution. I think we are that close to the precipice.
Didn't get what you wanted for Christmas? It's time to give yourself what you really wanted. Cooking is easy with Hexclad, whose one pan has both the performance of stainless steel and the convenience of nonstick. They're dishwasher safe and simple to wipe clean after use, as well as oven safe. Handles heat up to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. The patented hexagon design protects against scratches, even when using metal utensils. And Hexclad isn't just about pots and pans. Their knives are made of 67 layers of Japanese Damascus steel for a sharper edge that stays sharp longer for effortless slicing. Gordon Ramsay even uses Hexclad in his restaurants and his home, and he's the toughest critic on the planet. I always see that guy yelling at people. For a limited time only, our listeners get 10% off your order with our exclusive link. Just head to hexclad.com/Ask George. That's HEXCLAD.com/Ask George. Guys, I don't do a lot of cooking. You know that. I talk about this. But I do make spaghetti for my kids. That's like the one thing I can really make. And every time I make spaghetti for my kids, before with other pans, I would always burn my hand on the pot. It's one of the reasons that I keep out of the kitchen, because I'm always burning myself on the super hot handle when you take it off the stove. these handles don't get hot. It's like the greatest invention I've ever had in my life, where it's something about the way that this, what did they call it? The Japanese Damascus steel or something, like it doesn't get so hot that you burn yourself. These are the best pots and pans we've ever had. Our family loves them. You'll love them too. So again, our listeners get 10% off your order with our exclusive link. Head to hexclad.com/AskGeorge. Support our show and check them out at hexclad.com/AskGeorge. Make sure to let them know we sent you. Bon appetit. Let's eat with Hexclad's revolutionary cookware. You know, one of the things that's so alarming about you saying this is like, I expect this from JVL. JVL is always has the darkest timeline to take. You usually kind of feel like, you know, the courts will function normally. Like, even as we've watched every other backstop fall away, you know, you've always kind of had the courts and the law.
I'm going to lose some of these cases. And the thing is now is what we are seeing is inconsistent with anybody obeying the law.
Yeah.
And unless somebody gets a spine real fast in the Justice Department or somewhere else, I mean, we see this guy who they accidentally, I mean, they're just so incompetent. They accidentally put in charge of the FBI. He kind of stood up to them a little, but, you know, I don't see how this plays out without complete chaos.
Okay. Well, that's good. Great stuff.
I mean, this is how I see it right now. I hope I'm just insanely wrong, but I just don't see, you know, they're crazy. These people that were running the government are either crazy. Some of them are crazy. Others are just craven. Look at, let's take the Gaza thing. Okay. It's so ridiculous. You couldn't have made it up, but Trump goes out there and basically says he wants to basically ethnically cleanse Gaza, send the Palestinians to Jordan and Egypt or wherever, and turn Gaza into the Riviera probably with a Trump hotel. And everybody freaks out. The entire planet freaks out because no one thinks this is possible. No one thinks it's not immoral and illegal. It violates basic international law. It violates the law. It's a war crime and it's a crime against humanity. And it's just, you know, how are you going to actually physically do this without, you know, murdering 100,000 people? Like, it's just completely insane on many levels. And so the White House walks it back yesterday. Oh, no, blah, blah, blah. You know, they're bullshit. The way they always used to, you know, back in Shit Show 1, they used to always have to do this all the time. Although this one is really, really insane. And what does he do at 5:00 this morning? He puts out a Truth Social post saying how wonderful it's going to be when we got all the Palestinians out of Gaza and it's a wonderful, beautiful place to live.
Let's talk about Gaza for a hot second.
But my point is, he's fucking nuts.
No, I know.
And there's nothing, he's completely beyond control right now.
Did you see Susie Wiles' face when he's saying that? That was not a thing they had discussed previously. He just decided to throw it all out there. You know what's interesting about both Elon and
I didn't find it that
Trump
surprising because I know that's what he thinks.
No, I know. And Jared, I saw clips of Jared saying this like years ago. This, like, you know, we're going to make it, you know, it's right for
not
development.
Wrong in the sense that should be an idyllic place on the Mediterranean if it weren't for the political issues and the history and everything like that. I mean, in terms of as a real estate play, it ought to be good. But these people are so psychotic, they can't understand it. Well, these are actually people who live there, real people with lives. And they may not behave the way you want them to behave, but you just can't, you know, how are you going to get them all out? What right do you have to do that? Like, none of these things occur to these people because they are all so narcissistic and sociopathic.
Well, part of what's funny too is like he literally ran on an anti-interventionist platform. Are we going to be graded as liberators? Like, what is the plan? The whole thing was like, we are in too many forever wars. We're doing all this stuff. We shouldn't do all this adventurism abroad. And now what? We're invading Canada. We're invading Greenland. We're going to take over Gaza and the Panama Canal.
Yeah. Just for starters, that's just a warm-up act.
But you know what?
Listen, it's like, you're using logic. Okay, you cannot use law.
I know that that's a mistake.
It's a
But here's another piece of logic. Let me just, or like what it seems like to me though is that Trump and Elon are both just doing the thing that they know. Like Trump, like is like, I'm president now, so I'm going to develop. I don't want to go purchase other places and develop them because that's like what he is, a developer at his core. And Elon is like a person who dismantles. He's just doing to the federal government exactly what he did to Twitter.
To Twitter, correct.
And so they're just like using the same
they're
dumb things that they know.
In that sense, they're both, one trick ponies. Okay. And they, but I'll give Elon credit for zeroing in. I mean, this is the one, everything else I am not surprised by. Right. The one thing that I think is new that I was not on my bingo card was that Elon would zero in on the computer systems and take those over. I mean, it's sort of like, but it makes sense now in hindsight because like you're Dracula. What do? You go for the circulatory part. And this is what, and he's not wrong. You can cut off the money. You could shut down the government tomorrow. Of course, you could also crash the national debt. You could destroy the global economy. I mean, there are all sorts of collateral effects we ought to be concerned by. But yeah, I mean, they're just sticking to. I mean, they have limited playbooks. They, and there's somebody wrote something yesterday I saw on social media where Elon's very smart in a lot of ways, but so there's like the definition of idiot back in Roman or Greek times was somebody who didn't understand how they relate to the society around them. Mm-hmm. Okay. What Elon thinks, and a lot of these tech oligarchs, broligarchs, or whatever you want to call them, they think that they exist solely because of their own brilliance, not because they existed within a legal and social structure that allowed them to prosper. The rule of law, for example, you could not have, all this, all the stuff that has been done by Silicon Valley and it's all basically because we have a rule of law where you can have intellectual property and those rights can be enforced and people can't just copy stuff and people can't just break contracts. All of this stuff, it's like but none of this matters to these two, to Trump and Elon.
But actually, you just raised something that I was thinking about before when you were talking about it. So if let's just say Trump stops abiding by the law, we are thrust into this constitutional crisis. And you were saying, well, we don't have laws anymore, at least at the federal level. Does that apply to everyone? Does everybody stop obeying the law? Like, well, what's the, or let me ask just a second part of this question. And also, let's say Trump is actively trying to litigate against other people, right? So he's going after CBS. So do the courts allow him to litigate against other people if he's refusing to abide by their rulings in other cases?
That's a very good question. I think they will probably try to act in the normal fashion and handle the cases if nothing else is going on. But that being said, who's enforcing all these judgments that get issued? I don't know. Maybe only judgments that Trump gets will be enforced. I don't know. But I have to say, one of the things, why do we all obey the law? Why don't we just go and walk down the street and kill somebody for their lunch money? Well, there are a bunch of different reasons. One is we have moral consciences.
Right.
Another is we fear the impact. We fear prosecution.
Right.
If you have a legal system that shows itself not to be able to enforce the law, you lose one of those important constraints. And if you have a government where basically nobody has the moral constraints or is willing to act on moral constraints, we don't have law. We have absolute chaos. And that is, that's where I'm afraid we're headed. I'm just putting it another way. And I hope I'm wrong. I would love to be able to be wrong in 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years.
Well, you're going to forgive me, but I'm going to sit here and I'm going to keep trying to work up alternate scenarios of how you would put guardrails around this system as the guardrails collapse from the courts. But let's say Trump okay, so he does this thing you're saying, thrust us into a constitutional crisis. He's not obeying the rule. Now, I know that everything we've seen from Congress so far indicates that there is no limiting principle for them on like what they will tolerate from Trump. If he the Republicans, if he just refuses to start to obey the courts, will no Republicans do anything about that?
Well, what are they going to do?
Well, they could say something. I know.
No, I mean, I heard something that Tom Tillis, I got to look it up, but I saw some
Tom Tillis
amazing
is bad,
quote from
man.
Tom Tillis, who basically said, well, maybe some of this stuff is legal, but some of this stuff isn't. It doesn't really matter. Sometimes you just have to do stuff. I mean, basically, it was a quote to that effect. I don't think they have the spine. And even if you have a few of them, what are they going to do? Chuck Schumer is introducing a bill to say you can't do all the things that are illegal that they're doing. The bill's never going to pass. But so what? So let's make it, something's illegal 50 times over. What difference does it make if we say it's illegal for a 51st time in the U.S. Code? What does Congress get us? And there is an answer. The answer is provided by the framers was if you have a president who is violating his oath of office, which this guy is, he's clearly basically.
That's what I mean. Like 25th Amendment impeachment territory.
If I can finish.
Yeah. Oh, did I interrupt you? Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I interrupted you. I can't imagine how that works.
I know, right? He's basically cast his legal and constitutional obligations to the wind. He violates his oath of office almost every minute now. Yeah. He has delegated executive power to somebody who's not even a permanent employee of the government, let alone a principal officer. I mean, it's illegal, and this person is usurping Article 1 powers of the purse. I mean, you've got so much unconstitutionality here. I mean, the answer would be impeachment.
Right.
That should be the answer. You should be impeached and removed from office.
But here's the thing.
How's that going to go?
Okay, but hold on just 1 second. If he was doing this, McConnell, if he's still up, I mean, this guy.
McConnell,
Murkowski, Collins, like you could.
How are you going to, what do they do? They're not going to get they're not going to get, they're not going to get, maybe if you got 5 or 6 House members, you could vote it through a bill of impeachment, but I don't see that happening. But if it did, are you really going to get 67 votes in the Senate? Things got to get a lot worse before that happens.
Yeah. Okay.
And at that point, you think he's really going to leave office?
All right. So here's my next possibility. So right. This was, obviously I'm kicking around these other things, but I obviously see the futility of trying to say like, boy, Congress could do something, or maybe they're like, at this point of just refusing to obey the law, people in the streets is probably your last option.
Bingo. That's all we got. At the end of the day, that's what's going to have to come down to. Yes.
And he'll deploy the military against them. It will be a bloody confrontation. Go back to
the other point that I was making, which is I don't know whether some people are going to obey those orders, which is a good thing. I don't know. But this is, but you're seeing the point I've been making is this: as you gain this stuff out, you don't see a positive outcome. You don't see anything but chaos and violence. And I mean, play devil's advocate. Which logical step in this chain am I wrong?
I don't think it's wrong. I mean, I think it's conceivable. I think part of what is
where's it gonna what's the break in the chain that says it's not gonna happen? I can't figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, the break in the chain would be that they would abide by the court ruling because
and maybe they will. Maybe they will. I don't see it though. I think these people are that far gone. I think there's not many people in government who will have the backbone to stand up to Trump, and they will be removed.
Hey, let me ask you a different question. So I see Trump's complete emboldenment because the Supreme Court right, gave him total immunity from these actions, right? So he gets at, let's say one of the limiting, again, one of the fears is at some point he's not in office and he spends his very last years in prison. But he can't now because he's immune. I mean, I don't know if he's immune from all this stuff, but
No,
Elon's not immune. Elon's not immune.
Yeah, but Elon can be pardoned. What fear does Elon have?
What about after, though? What about after they're out of power?
Well, what do you mean? When are they going to be out of power?
So I mean, I guess, okay, so that's that. In this scenario, they don't abide by the court rulings and they stop having elections?
Well, I mean, maybe, but how do we?
Because 2026.
Right, but so we have to get to 2026 and 2028. I'm worried we're not even going to get there. But the bottom line is, why should Elon Musk fear anything?
Well, we'll get there in the sense that those days will come.
But he will. He's, this is what Trump told people this during Shit Show 1. Just build a wall, just do this, do all that, I will pardon you. And all of these people have nothing to fear because they actually have potentially broader immunity than Trump has. Because Trump is...
Why?
Well, because Trump is only immune from criminal prosecution for his official acts, which is why he could have been prosecuted and sent to jail for his shenanigans relating to the 2020 election, because not everything he did was an official act or even could be characterized as an official act. His purloining of documents was not official. His what he did with his books and records in the Stormy Daniels case was not official conduct. He's still subject to prosecution for those things. Let's leave apart the state and federal thing because that's a little wrinkle on it. But if you're Elon or you're Kosh or you're Pam Bondi or pick somebody in the government and Trump pardons you, he can pardon you for stealing money from a grandmother, under federal law, not under state law. So basically,
but this scenario only works if Trump never leaves power.
Well, it doesn't matter. He could issue a pardon today for every crime that has been committed since the beginning of his administration or the beginning of time by all these people. Right? So if he ever did leave office, let's say it's at noon on January 20th, 2029, he'd basically issue pardons to everybody who did his bidding during his 4 years in office. Let's assume he's leaving office. And they would have broader immunity than he would have. He'd probably want to pardon himself too to see if he could get the benefit of that broader immunity. Because those people can be, pardon can cover unofficial acts. So if one of these Doge kids decides to, hey, let's use the payment system to send me $1 billion to my Swiss bank account, that kid could be pardoned.
Yeah. Okay. I'm extremely depressed. And
I didn't mean to be depressed.
No. I think I don't even mean, it's not about being depressed. This is clarifying in ways. I wanted to get into this. I want to ask you one other question though that I've been kicking around, which is, and maybe, I mean, in your previous scenario, like if everything's lawless, then the answer to my questions, all of my questions about like, can this be done is like, well, technically no, but nobody's abiding by it. So it's all lawless. But like, without Congress, can the president just dissolve USAID?
Yes, probably. Because again, I'm not a bureaucrat or expert in any of this stuff, but my understanding is USAID is not a statutory creation of Congress. What it does is it does dispense money that has been appropriated by Congress. So to that extent, whether or not USAID exists, they cannot basically just say, we're not spending money for these purposes that Congress provided that we spend the money for. But my understanding is that USAID was created by an executive order of President Kennedy. And it's not a statutory creation. And
Congress, in 1998, Congress established USAID as its own agency.
Oh, did it? Okay. Okay. All right. Well, then they can't disestablish it then if that's true.
I mean, so moving into the State Department, like, I guess I'm wondering, like, is that move legal?
It may not be. Again, I'd have to see what the statute. I did not know that the USAID had been created as a separate agency. I thought it was something that sort of existed, and that Congress, once it's like the EPA for a long time was not a statutorily created agency. It was basically President Nixon repurposed some, office in the EOB, and then, it basically created this agency by executive order to enforce all the environmental mandates that had been passed by Congress, which made sense. So, the president has the power to create structures to carry out Congress's, instructions, even if they don't actually create the department. So he has some residual authority to do that.
Well, then let's just take one where it's not even a question, which is like Department of Education.
Right. He cannot dissolve the Department of Education, and he cannot refuse to spend the money that has been appropriated to be spent through the Department of Education. Correct. Absolutely. That would be profoundly illegal.
You know what's crazy to me about all this stuff they could just pass a new budget. If they instead of just they're gonna pass a budget soon. Like, the budget stuff is so, like, why not just do this through the normal budgetary process and cut everything?
Because they don't have the votes.
Because even Republicans in Congress won't give it to them.
Right. Well, we don't have. I mean, if this stuff, we have been marching in the fields of the right for decades, you and
yes.
I. Okay? At least until shit show 1. There are always people who wanted to basically dismantle the government.
Sure.
From, like Grover Norquist, who basically said he wants to make the government so small you could strangle it in the bathtub.
Drown it in the bathtub.
Drown it in the bathtub, that old famous thing. And the reason why that never happened, or anything close to it never happened, is because there just isn't political support for it. And that's what the ultimate reason why all of this is anti-democratic, apart from the fact that, they're just running roughshod over statutes and constitutional restrictions, is that we've never had the will as a people to vote in legislators to do these things. Okay? Because it's, to just basically dissolve the entire government. That's crazy, right? Everybody has their little things in the government. Some of us like some stuff. Some of us don't like other stuff. Okay? And we all have different preferences. And what the democratic system, what our constitutional system does is it provides a mechanism by which we work that out. So I have to accept some stuff I don't like in order to accept the things that I like. And they don't want to play by that anymore. And that's where we are. They are doing things they could not possibly have the political support to do. Or they are trying to do things that they don't have the political support to do. Because if they had the political support to do it, they would have been done. They would have been done during shit show 1. Would have been done during the Reagan administration, right? And, one of the things you have to accept living in a constitutional democracy is you don't get everything you want.
Yeah, I guess the only pushback I would have to this is that if you think every Republican would give him, right, they've got this tiny majority in Congress, and if you think every Republican would be on his side about everything else, all the lawless stuff, but they would stand up to him on funding on the budget, like, why?
Well, it never has happened before. Right? They've never actually, when the Republicans have had control of both the presidency and Congress, we've never seen serious fiscal restraint on there. I mean, we see a little bit on the margins for some things.
I know, but if Trump was like, pass this budget where I cut the hell out of all this stuff,
right,
why wouldn't they do it? If they're taking his marching orders on everything else.
Well, they don't want to do it because they don't want to accept political responsibility for it.
You think the one thing that still exists for them is the incentive of keeping their positions?
That's all they care about.
Yeah.
So they're afraid of him because he can create a backlash and get them primary, but they're also afraid of the backlash if they take responsibility for anything. So they basically sit on their hands and they do nothing. I mean, this is how Trump survives committing all these high crimes and misdemeanors. They knew he was guilty. Like, I mean, how many times do we have to listen to Mitch McConnell say that the criminal law was he knew what this guy did was criminal, but he didn't want to take the political responsibility for taking them out. So these people are just gonna be ciphers, and maybe one or two of them will show some courage, maybe 3 or 4, but it's not enough, because the only mechanism that Congress has to control an executive that is completely out of control and completely defying the Constitution and his oath of office is impeachment and removal.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, if he doesn't go, who takes him out of the White House? Who's there to order that to happen? And so everything comes down to, as you pointed out, and I've been saying online, the streets.
Yeah, man.
You look distressed, and I don't blame you. And
What do we have to go lead a protest now in the streets? And
we're all gonna, believe me, we're all gonna be out there. We have to be out there, because this is where it's, unless somebody decides all of a sudden Donald Trump grows a conscience, and Elon and all of these people decide to put their loyalty to this one guy aside and honor the Constitution and the laws of the United States, unless enough people do that all at once in the executive branch, we are going to see essentially the dissolution of the federal rule of law. I just don't, I keep running this in my head, and I can't think of the scenario where that happens, where all of a sudden these people just decide, oh my gosh, we've gone too far. We have to obey the law, even if we don't like it. I don't see that happening. And as I point out, Congress can't do anything unless the only mechanism Congress has is impeachment and removal. And we know where that goes.
Yeah.
So, what I'm describing here is essentially the potential destruction in a matter of weeks. And again, when we used to say stuff like this during the 2024 campaign, during the 2020 campaign, during shit show 1, that, we run the risk of the complete devolution of the rule of law in America. Nobody knew what that meant.
Yeah.
And it sounded crazy, right? It sounds crazy because things that you walk out on the street, it's all fine. Everything's fine. Everybody's going to work. I'm going to go to the Super Bowl this weekend. Everything's going to be fun. But when you actually talk this through, we are at very close to that point where all of these things, all of these nightmare scenarios could come to pass. And people don't fully appreciate that yet, including the media starting to catch up a little bit. But, it's like Oliver Darcy, who writes this amazing column every day for basically, he used to work at CNN as a media critic, and now he has his own, not Substack, it's a competitor of Substack, but he basically says, the on the ground reporting is explaining this reasonably well after kind of being thrown for a loop for a couple of days, but we're not seeing screaming headlines like, crisis in America. We have become numb to what's happening here and how pathological and destructive it is and how close we are to the precipice. I don't think anyone who doesn't watch carefully and doesn't think about these issues can fully appreciate it. But when you actually try to focus on, well, where's the stopping point? It's hard to reach it's hard not to reach the conclusion that there is none.
Yeah.
Which is why you're listening to me all depressed and you're not even saying, George, I don't think it's that bad. I mean, I've been saying this for the last 2 or 3 days over the weekend to some very, very smart people, professors of political scientists, other lawyers. And I say, tell me I'm wrong. And they can't.
Well,
So, I'm with JVL. If JVL agrees, if that's what JVL is saying, then I thoroughly agree with JVL.
yeah, it's always the darkest timeline. That's what we walked through today, but it is real. We are really confronting this
And you're
stuff.
right.
And you're right
I'm
that
not,
people haven't caught up.
I'm not apocalyptic, and I'm not.
Usually you're the opposite. You're like,
correct.
no, here's how he's going to go down.
Right. Oh, and you see that completely gone because now it's like we're stripped down to the last defense. And there's nobody there, basically. There's a gap in our lines.
The last defense is the American people.
The last defense is basically all these people coming up and basically throwing their bodies in front of the tanks, like the Medai at Tiananmen Square. This is where we possibly are.
Okay, throwing your bodies in front of tanks. That's where we're going to leave you guys this week. Good luck, America, as JVL says. Thanks, George, for talking us through that. It is something I've been trying to think through, so I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah.
We'll see you guys next week. I usually say a closing, but right now I'm all whatever. And so let's see. Thanks, George Conway, for explaining it all. Thanks to all of you for listening to another episode. Don't forget to subscribe. Listen to us on Apple Podcasts. Do all the subscribing. Let's all be in this together.
Well, George Conway, he's a man with a plan. Got to sit down with Sarah Longwell, take a stand, explain all the legal problems they're piling high. With Donald Trump, oh my, oh my, oh my. He said, Sarah, let me break it down for you. There's obstruction of justice, corruption too, the legal tangles and troubles, they're growing fast. It's a storm that's gonna last and last. Oh, Conway, tell Longwell all about it. Those legal problems can't live without it. From the Emoluments to the Russian ties. Oh, Sarah, listen close.